Welcome to Lost World History. The Egyptian desert, 2500 BCE, under the searing gaze of the sun god Ra. 100,000 slaves groan under the lash, hauling massive limestone blocks across the sand. Their bodies break, their spirits shatter, and their bones are ground into the very foundations of the pyramids they are forced to build. This is the image seared into our collective memory by Hollywood epics and popular legend, the pyramids of Giza, monuments built on the backs of a subjugated people. But what if this entire story, this foundational myth of ancient Egypt, is a lie? What if the brutal slave masters and the whipped, starving masses never existed? The truth unearthed from the sands just south of the Sphinx will completely shatter what you think you know about the greatest construction project in human history. Archaeological digs at a site known as Heit el-Ghurab, the Wall of the Crow, reveal a shocking truth. The pyramid builders were not slaves. They were not foreigners captured in war, nor a downtrodden underclass. They were skilled Egyptian workers, well-fed, well-cared for, and deeply respected for their craft. This wasn't an act of tyrannical oppression. It was a national project, a logistical masterpiece fueled by civic pride and religious devotion. Using strategies so effective they allowed for the creation of wonders that would stand for eternity. The story begins not with whips and chains, but with bread and beer. When you are undertaking a construction project that will last for decades and involve tens of thousands of people, your single greatest challenge isn't moving stone, it's feeding the workforce. For centuries, the lack of a massive slave cemetery near the pyramids was a nagging puzzle for historians. But the discovery of the workers' village and its associated bakeries and storehouses provided the definitive answer. This was no slave camp. It was a bustling city, a perfectly organized support system for the king's sacred project. Excavations led by archaeologist Mark Lehner have uncovered dozens of bakeries, complete with large-scale ovens and pottery vats for dough preparation. Analysis of these facilities suggests they were capable of producing thousands of loaves of bread every single day. Alongside the bakeries, remnants of fish processing plants and vast quantities of animal bones primarily from cattle, sheep, and goats paint a picture of a diet rich in protein. This wasn't subsistence-level food. The skeletal remains of the workers themselves, found in a nearby cemetery, confirm this. Forensic analysis shows that these men were muscular and generally healthy, with healed fractures and evidence of sophisticated medical care that a slave would never receive. We're talking about set bones, amputated limbs that had healed over, and even evidence of brain surgery. These people were valuable assets, and the state invested heavily in their well-being. They weren't just fed, they were nourished. They were given the fuel required for the back-breaking labor they performed day in and day out. The logistics are staggering. It's estimated that the project required over 1,600 kilograms of meat every day to feed the crews. This supply chain, stretching all the way down the Nile, was a marvel of administration, a testament to the power and organizational genius of the Old Kingdom state. Slaves don't get the best cuts of beef. Honored workers do, but if they weren't slaves, who were they? The answer comes from graffiti and inscriptions found hidden within the pyramids themselves, and from the tombs in the workers' cemetery. These were not anonymous laborers. They had names, titles, and a profound sense of identity. Inscriptions scrawled in red ochre paint on the giant blocks, in places never meant to be seen again, reveal the names of the work crews, names like the drunkards of Menkaure or the friends of Khufu gang. This isn't the language of slaves. It's the jocular, competitive slang of proud craftsmen, teams of men who took immense pride in their work. They were marking their territory, leaving their stamp on eternity, boasting of their contribution to the pharaoh's ascent to the heavens. The cemetery provides even more intimate details. Unlike the unmarked mass graves one would expect for a slave population, this was a place of honor. The workers were buried in modest but proper tombs, laid to rest with the tools of their trade, chisels, mallets, pottery filled with food and beer for the afterlife. Their burial sites were oriented towards the great pyramids they had built, a final, eternal gaze upon their life's greatest achievement. These men were part of a rotational labor force, a kind of national service. Peasants from across Egypt would travel to Giza to work for a period of several months, particularly during the Nile's annual inundation when their fields were flooded and unfarmable. In exchange for their labor, they received payment in the form of food, clothing, shelter, and tax exemptions. For a farmer, a stint at Giza wasn't servitude, it was an opportunity. It was a chance to earn a good living, contribute to a project of immense religious importance, and be part of something far grander than their everyday lives. So where did the slave myth come from? The answer begins with a man who lived 2,000 years after the pyramids were built. The Greek historian Herodotus, visiting Egypt around 450 BCE. Herodotus was a tourist, relying on local guides and translators to understand the wonders he saw. He wrote that the Great Pyramid was built by 100,000 men working in 3-month shifts, claiming they suffered terribly. His account, colored by the Greek perception of such monumental works as acts of hubris possible only through tyranny, became the primary source for a world fascinated by Egypt. The story was then amplified by Judeo-Christian traditions, particularly the Book of Exodus, which, although set more than 1,000 years after the Giza pyramids were completed, cemented the association between Egyptian construction and Hebrew slavery in the popular imagination. This narrative was too compelling to let go. It was a simple, dramatic story of oppression and megalomania. Hollywood seized upon it in the 20th century, with films like The Ten Commandments creating the definitive yet completely inaccurate visual of whip-wielding overseers driving columns of suffering slaves. The image was powerful, archetypal, and wrong. The true story is far more complex and, in many ways, more impressive. The construction of the pyramids wasn't a feat of brutality, but a triumph of organization. It speaks not to a pharaoh's cruelty, but to his ability to unify his people and mobilize them in a shared national and spiritual goal. The real pyramid builders were a community. They lived, worked, ate, drank, and were buried together. They were doctors, masons, scribes, bakers, and quarrymen. They were fathers and sons from distant villages who shared a sense of purpose on the Giza plateau. Building a pyramid was a sacred act, a way to ensure the cosmic order, or Manat *, and to guarantee the eternal life of their king, who was their living God, and their connection to the divine. Their labor was a form of worship, a physical prayer offered up in stone. The evidence is written in their bones, in their homes, and on the very stones they laid. The slave myth is shattered, replaced by the reality of a proud and capable people who built eternity not because they were forced, but because they believed. The most complete evidence is emerging from the sand, telling a story not of chains, but of community.